I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone. This is Rich Bren, a guest moderator today. Mr. Ruke is in the great state of North Carolina, I believe, unable to attend, so he's asked me to come in and help to do the intros, coordinate some of the later time, if available, for us to pose the questions back to the professionals from CargoNet. I mention it now, and I'll remind you again later. The way we want to handle the questions today, if you have any during the presentation, is that there is a chat box on your side of your screen, and if you could submit your questions into the chat box, we'll try to cover as many of them as possible at the end, time allows. So welcome again. Welcome today, ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are members of the MCIEF, you special guests. Today we have an opportunity to expand our knowledge, gain a marketing advantage, and further demonstrate our professional commitment to the trucking industry. These monthly webinars have become a valued source of timely and critical information to help the attendees on a variety of topics. CargoNet has been a program that Tommy and I have been explaining and sharing with truck insurance professionals for several years. Many of you were able to see a presentation last fall during our Advanced Topics programs where we went into a fairly comprehensive review of the entire program, and since that was well received and we've seen growing commitment and interest, we want to revisit that today and gain some additional knowledge and learn about the response methods that CargoNet has continued to build out to become an even more effective tool and a more desired partner for cargo transporters, for the warehouse companies, for the shippers, and their insurance providers. So if you've not been telling your customers or asking your insurance companies about CargoNet, you need to find out more today, and you need to follow up after this event and start including that activity in your customer service strategy. Garry Rivell is the VP of Insurance Services for this special analytics group of the ISO companies. He's a veteran insurance company person himself, over 35 years of experience and leadership in sales and marketing with some national carriers. And he is involved in developing the relationships with insurance companies and insurance brokers that are CargoNet members. And so he's helping to manage these tactical relationships with the people inside the insurance space. In addition, he serves on several different boards, such as Illinois Fair Plan, CAIP, and CCI, and he's been a guest speaker at various different conventions. He holds a CIC as well as a graduate of Business Administration from the University of Massachusetts. In addition, today, Keith Lewis, VP of Operations, is going to be joining us. And Keith is responsible for managing CargoNet's operational efforts, which include the supervision of CargoNet Operations Center for the staff, investigative support, and systems training for CargoNet members. He has over 20 years of experience, started in the 3PL, the third-party logistics side, and started his career back in 1980 as a managing operations guy and advanced with one of the nation's largest 3PLs. And from there, he went on to become a general manager and took care of a 1.1 million square foot distribution center. And went on also to work for a couple other major 3PLs. In 2000, Keith left the logistics industry to pursue a career in law enforcement, where he worked as a task force agent for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Keith has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. So today, keep in mind Garry. He's a key contact for you, quote unquote, insurance people, for you to know and to utilize. So turn your attention modes to high and be sure that you capture key points that you learned today so you can apply them and share them with your team, with your insurance companies, and with your customers. Again, if you have any questions as we go forward, please put those into the chat box, and we're going to try to hit as many of those as we can at the closing of today's presentation. So, Mr. Rivell, I'm going to turn it over to you. The audience is yours.
Thanks, Rich. And first, on behalf of Keith and myself, I want to extend our appreciation to Tommy for inviting CargoNet to be a participant in this presentation today. Also, thank Beth for setting this up and getting Keith and I straightened out, and also to Rich for being the moderator for this presentation. Want to start out by talking about And Beth, I assume you've turned this over to me?
Yes, I have.
Okay, there we go. Want to start out, I just need to make sure that Keith is on the line because I know he had just gotten out of another meeting. Keith, are you with us?
I'm here, Gary.
Okay. Just wanted to kind of let Keith quickly review what the major problems are with respect to cargo theft in our industry, and then we'll move on from there. Keith?
Sure. The crime is ever evolving. We all have the stereotype of what cargo theft probably was, you know, in the early days of transportation, obviously going back to the stagecoach and train robberies, but, you know, the days of the setting a driver up and robbing them at gunpoint, pulling them out of the truck and you know, assaulting the driver to get the load. Well, the days have changed where the drivers, you know, they're not the part of the victim pool, if you will. The problem now, we've got so many trucks on the road. I guess the good thing for the bad guys is there's so many trucks on the road. The bad part for the good guys is that there's so many trucks parked everywhere that the bad guys now have, it's almost in the rest areas and the like. Can you all hear me okay, Gary?
So far.
Okay. And where, you know, the trucks are just left unattended. They're stealing them out of truck stops, rest areas, Walmart shopping centers. They're left unattended. To kind of roll up the ladder of sophistication, I just left a carrier, a trucking company, a respected trucking company's office in Missouri, and they had a load of electronics. They picked it up in Chicago, brought it back to Missouri, put it in their facility, locked it in the building, the truck and trailer. The bad guys followed them from Bolingbrook, Illinois, all the way to northern Missouri, and broke in the shop over the weekend, disabled the alarm, and stole a load of televisions. From that sophistication, we also have some emerging crimes right now, where the identity theft, I call them supply chain cyber crimes, where again the traditional days of stealing the truck and trailer from the truck stop, the bad guy can now sit home in his living room and use his computer and his internet and a voice over IP phone or a track phone, a throwaway phone, as the bad guys call it, and shop online on the internet load boards and pick and choose the loads he wants to pick up. And then he just goes out and steals the identity of another carrier and books that load with that broker and goes and represents himself as the innocent victim carrier, picks up the load, and he's gone. There's quite a few variations from that. I mean, there's just so many different spin-offs of that crime, but just think about how your identity is. And someone represents you and takes out a mortgage on a home and leaves you with the mortgage payment with no house. And that's how these victims feel, that they've got the bill for the product, but they've got no product. And when this happens, the insurance companies, you know, are there for them. I know some of our members work with them as best they can, but law enforcement works as hard as they can on this, but these people are like ghosts, and sometimes there's just not a lot you can do. So those are just some of the emerging things that we have right now. The cargo theft is back on the rise. I know from a law enforcement standpoint why we're having an uptick right now, but I said a year ago that we're taking in 3 to 5 cargo thefts a day at CargoNet, and jokingly I said that the fraudulent pickups and supply chain identity thefts are going to surpass, and everybody kind of laughed at me, and now we're seeing probably 5 to 7 a day, if not successful thefts, but attempts, and that's going to evolve from there. So I just take a wait and see look here, and just curious as what's going to be the next big crime. That's pretty much all I had as far as where we are right now at cargo theft, Gary.
All right. Yeah, and one of the other key problems with this is the budgetary impact that is being realized by law enforcement at all levels, from the local to the state and even the national level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into our law enforcement alliances. Beth, for whatever reason, I'm unable to advance this, so if you want to go ahead to the next slide. They say that a picture's worth 1,000 words. In this case, this could take 1,000 words to explain this, but actually what this is a pictorial of exactly the inner relationships between, if you go from 12 o'clock to 4 o'clock, you're looking at all the various kinds of logistics that are moving the cargo in the supply chain. From 4 to 8, the 2 outer bands reflect the insurance industry. And then from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock, you're looking at retail and manufacturing. If you notice that the bullseye, however, we've got police or law enforcement. And surrounding that is the CargoNet database and also the analysts that we have in our command center, which functions 24/7. Our command center is predominantly made up of, in fact, CargoNet is predominantly made up of retired law enforcement. Keith, for example, retired from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The head of CargoNet is a retired chief of police, FBI Academy graduate. The head of our the command center itself and the staff that's there is a retired captain of law enforcement and also an FBI Academy graduate. And the gentleman who's handling the onboarding of law enforcement up in Canada that we went into July 1st of this year is also retired law enforcement, but also a FBI Academy graduate. But as you'll see, one of the things when we bring on law enforcement under a strategic alliance with them, we actually go out and train them not only on our system, but we train them in terms of investigative support. We also train them on the analytic capabilities that we have, and we do a significant amount of analytics for some police agencies that we'll talk more about when we get into that segment with respect to law enforcement. Beth, if you want to go ahead. What I want to start out with is the basically our three-pronged approach. Analytics and the data is central to everything that we do. We've got a number of both passive as well as proactive deterrents that we'll talk about, and then we'll spend more time on recovery. And in some respects, this first segment will be academic, but later we'll get into some real case studies where you can see all this, coming together. Go ahead, Beth. These are some of the deterrence, prevention, as well as recovery methods that we currently have in place, starting with driver screening and training. CargoNet members can go through a portal. They can go to IntelliCorp, which has an a la carte choice of selections from experience background, educational background, criminal background, as well as licensing. And we even have one sister company called IIX that they would have access to. And the thing that's very unique about this is that once you've entered an individual's license number, they are constantly monitoring and get all kinds of reports. So if you've entered Garry Rivell's name as an example, given the Pennsylvania driver's license, and Garry Rivell has a suspended license 60 days later due to a drunk driving charge, as a trucker company, you would probably have to wait until you run that report next year, whereas this company's capabilities would notify you immediately when they get knowledge of a license being suspended, so that you don't have drivers driving around, running into people, running into things with suspended licenses. Next, Beth. Oh, and then the training, by the way, is going to be for drivers. There's no charge for that for members. It's an e-platform and is really centered around cargo security related topics, not only to protect cargo, but also to protect yourself from a driver standpoint. And as I said, there is no charge for CargoNet members for that service. The next thing is the trailer marking program. When a trucking company becomes a member, they'll get a certain number of these decals that you can see here. This has the same effect as the ADT alarm placards that people have on their homes. So the opportunistic thief that is walking a truck stop lot hopefully will pass this just the same as the opportunistic thief in the neighborhood will do the same thing. And we can only tell you this much, that we've never had it reported that any truck with this on it has been stolen, but you know, we'll see over time. The next thing, Beth, is our truck stop watch program. This has actually been on the drawing board and is kind of on the back burner at this time, but the idea, obviously you have a very environmentally target-rich place to go looking if you're the opportunistic. At the same time, if it's a targeted load, you love the opportunity when they do pull into a truck stop, and in some cases they even leave the keys in the ignition. Other cases they're just in the getting dinner, getting a shower long enough for them to take the load. But there's limited physical controls at truck stops and a very low level of awareness. So our concept behind this is to utilize signage, employee awareness training, employee incentive, reward, so that if they do see suspicious activity that results in arrest, they will get a reward. And then some truck stops now have these ticker boards where we hope to be able to place information associated with stolen conveyances in those given areas. Go ahead, Beth. One of the other things in terms of the analytics that we utilize, we do have some member trucking companies that use this almost on a weekly basis, where they're hauling unusually high-valued loads. They will identify for us the place of pickup, identify the destination, and identify the lane that they expect to be traveling. And what we'll do is the command center will prepare a report for them showing them where the hotspots are along that lane. It is then up to the trucking company and the driver to manage their time and mileage and everything, so that they either stop 50, 75 miles before they get to that hotspot, or 57, 75 miles past that hotspot before they do stop. And again, right now we probably have 5 or 6 different trucking companies that utilize that service. Go ahead, Beth. The next is the pocket tip card. I mentioned that we have predominantly retired law enforcement, so they understand the importance of getting complete information as well as accurate information when we issue law enforcement alerts. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a little bit. So one of the things that we have, and these can be co-branded with the name of an insurance company, with the name of the trucking company, with the name of an insurance broker, however you want to do it. But these are relatively inexpensive, but the main thing is it gives them contact information, and on the flip side of these, it gives them the critical information. In law enforcement terms, it's actionable information that would enable us to get the law enforcement alert out as quickly as possible. The next 2 items I'm actually going to, if you want, hostage load support. This is really Keith's baby, and I'll let him explain what it is, also explain what it is not, and how the success, and Keith is a pretty modest guy, but so far he has 100% batting average with respect to recoveries. And by the way, before I turn it over to Keith, just as a general statement, these, if you're not familiar with this situation, if you're an insurance company, usually you never find out about it, and law enforcement will not respond to it until it reaches a certain level that becomes a criminal act that Keith can best describe.
Thanks, Garry. And Garry, thanks for throwing me under the bus. I'm the only guy without an FBI Academy certificate. So,
yeah, but no one else here in supply chain like you do.
Yeah. The hostage loads, and you know, if y'all haven't heard about these, and we really kind of got in this by accident. One of our members called us and had a problem, and it's become something that we've tried to help our members with, and we've been pretty successful with it. And I could spend an hour talking to you about hostage loads, but let me just give you the executive summary on this. The broker tenders a load to a carrier. The trucker picks up the load. Something goes wrong en route. It's reconsigned. It's overweight. The driver has to unload it by hand load it when he gets there. Something's just not right. They get into a dispute, and the broker, or the broker, and we've got a lot of newer people in the industry that really don't understand how the whole driver thing works and how you use verbal judo to get done what you want to get done. They get into a dispute, a confrontation with the driver. The next thing you know, the threats are going back and forth. You know, everybody's cursing at everybody, and it just goes downhill from there if it could get any worse. And the one thing that brokers don't have is they don't have any leverage. And what I mean by leverage is they don't have the load. The trucker has the load. It's on his truck. And now what? The guy's saying, I'm not going to deliver it until you pay me up front. And by the way, I want X dollars more. And sometimes it's reasonable. In a lot of these cases that I've worked with our members and potential clients, the request is reasonable. And to be quite honest with you folks, our broker, our member, your insured has set the stage for this to go wrong. So what I have to do is come back in on the back end as an intermediary without having a dog in the fight. Just like a hostage negotiation on a police job, I've got to put the pieces back together, unpeel the onion, find out what happened, and get the parties talking. Because the guy holding the load, he doesn't want the load. He wants his money. The guy that's tendered him the load, he wants the load delivered. So a lot of times time helps heal this. But getting the parties back together and talking is the key. Some of these are not hostage loads. They appear to be hostage loads on the front end. We start working them as a hostage load, find out that the bad guy, the carrier, is really a bad guy. There really is no dispute. He's making up a fraudulent excuse to buy himself some time while he steals the load or sells it. And it's to be honest with you, it's just an outright theft. So we have to unpeel that onion real quick and find out if it is a true hostage load, put the pieces back together, or determine if it is a true theft. And if it's a true theft, then we start working it like a true theft and nudge law enforcement to get them involved. If you have any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Okay, moving on then to pre-pass. This is another one that Keith has worked on. This is an exclusive arrangement between CargoNet and pre-pass, but I'll allow Keith to explain exactly what it is. It just went into live production or live use within probably, the last 5 or 6 weeks, if I remember correctly.
Yes, absolutely. And some of these things are so simple, these agreements with people are so simple. We sit down at a table. Garry and I went to Arizona last year, sat down with the pre-pass folks, and we had a discussion. We shook hands, but it took a year to get an MOU put together with their legal team and our folks to make sure that all the I's were dotted, T's were crossed. But again, this is something that we're real proud of. Those of you that live in areas where they have tolls, and you have, like in Illinois where I just left, they have what's called the I-Pass, or if you're in Florida, they have the Sun Pass, or I'm sure in New Jersey they have something else, Pennsylvania. But think about that toll transponder. Sorry, my dog's barking. They have that toll transponder in the vehicle. And in the truck, the toll transponder is tied in with the VIN number. The trucking company, as far as compliance, is there insurance in effect? D, all of the above. And if you've ever driven by a weigh station down the highway, you see two things. You see the light that says scale open, all trucks must stop, or you'll see scale closed. The drivers like to see scale closed so they can keep going. But in the case of pre-pass, the scale's open, there's a transponder, and now there's a new sign that gives the driver, if he's got pre-pass and the transponder connects and everything's good, gives that driver a green light, so he doesn't even have to exit the highway now. Doesn't even exit, he just keeps on going. UPS was the driving force behind this back in the late 80s, and it saved the industry probably billions of dollars in efficiency, fuel, all those things. So what we thought of was, hey, a lot of our members and a lot of truckers use pre-pass, And if we could get an arrangement with Prepass to where we could send them our alerts electronically, they can upload them. We have the VIN numbers and the alerts. And we send them those alerts, they upload those VIN numbers, and if that truck rolls through, you can figure this out, the truck rolls through, the alarm goes off. We've got it set up where there's an alarm, and the alarm goes off. Now, if the trucker is a bad guy and he's not going to stop, they send a chase car after him or radio ahead. Some of your more sophisticated bad guys will take that, to be honest with you, they'll take that transponder and throw it out. But what we're hoping on is the guy that's not sophisticated, that wants to leave the transponder in there because he thinks that he can just keep on driving and he won't get pulled in the scale. Because his chances of getting caught at the scale, if they bring him in for an inspection with a stone load of cargo, are far worse than leaving the transponder in and just hoping they give him the green light and let him go. So this is something that just went live about, like Garry said, about 5 weeks ago. It took a year, over a year, to get it going. And there's obviously we're the only ones that do what we do. They're the only ones that do what they do. There's no other nonprofit out there working the scales and handling this for the states. And it's a unique opportunity for us to work with Prepass. There's 331 Prepass locations in the United States. So what I did, I took the Prepass locations and I laid them out on a map over where the thefts were, the high volume areas. Obviously you don't have cargo thefts. You usually don't see them in Montana, and they don't have a lot of they don't have a lot of inspection points in Montana. We don't have a lot of thefts there. We don't have a lot of scales. But where we do have a high amount of thefts, coincidentally, we have a high amount of Prepass locations. So we feel that it's just a matter of time before we start getting some wins off of this, getting some good recoveries.
And as Keith indicated, with 330 weigh stations, that actually covers 39 different states. Go ahead, Beth, please. Get into some of the initiatives that we have ongoing with the trucking and industry, the manufacturers, and also freight brokers or logistics companies. We've already started with the trucking members to obviously if we have any type of alerts going out on topics other than theft. Intelligence alerts such as identification theft, fraudulent pickup, missing driver, any type of thing other than the actual theft. They find very useful from an intelligence standpoint, and they'll go out daily as we get them. The other thing we started about probably 3 months ago was we send our members weekly report on cargo theft incidents. It begins with a cover page. It shows a map and the balloons where all those thefts occurred just for that week. And then there's also a follow-up that gives them some basic information in terms of how the theft occurred so that maybe they can find a nugget of information that they can include in their own risk management practices to avoid similar situations. We've also begun a monthly truck stop incident report, and the report gives very specific locations so that there are some trucking companies who have already grabbed this and are running with it, and they're giving notices to their drivers that there are certain truck stops that they're not supposed to be stopping at just because of the high incidence of thefts occurring there. We also began this year quarterly webinars for training on pertinent prevention and security topics, including fraudulent pickup as well as identity theft. And then once a quarter, the command center will give a summarized version of the quarterly report. A lot of these trucking companies aren't that big. They don't have a lot of time to dig into it. So what we try to do is provide them a summarized report orally using a webinar format to give them the highlights of shifting patterns that we see, whether it's geographic or commodity. Go ahead, Beth. This is one of our manufacturers, and we're seeing this spread out from the manufacturers. Just to give you a perspective of some of the names, and the ones that I'll share with you obviously get it. They understand the problem. But this happens to be from LG Electronics, who has been a CargoNet member also since almost the beginning. Also joining LG has been Sony, Samsung, and Panasonic. they are all aboard now as CargoNet members. But this was an excerpt from an email they sent to CargoNet indicating what they had done in terms of communicating with every trucking company who has hauled for them. And it basically says, in so many words, that based on their experience with CargoNet's successes from a recovery and mitigation perspective, they're asking them to at least hear, get a presentation, and so forth. Now, behind the scenes, what's going on is really a couple things. Number one, almost from day one, they put in the RFP asking the question, are you or are you not a CargoNet member? We were told that behind the scenes, their intention of utilizing that information was try to move more shipments using CargoNet member trucking companies under the belief that they're just a notch above other trucking companies if they're willing to understand the risk management benefits of CargoNet and basically employ that by virtue of membership. They have also given us a complete list of every trucking company that this email had gone to, and they have asked us to monitor and report on a monthly basis back to them as to which trucking companies have contacted CargoNet and received a presentation, as well as which ones have joined. And I do know, talking to my counterpart, Sal Marino, from the trucking space, he had one gentleman call up as a result of this email, and he said, sign me up. He said, don't you want to know more about it, and do you have a date available? He said, I can read between the lines. Just sign me up and let's get going. So that's one of the things that's occurring from the manufacturing space. Go ahead, Beth. This is an actual email or excerpts from it from a logistics company who likewise has sent this out to every trucker that hauls for them. And again, they're talking about they've taken the step as an added layer of security, and they're asking them to also check in to find out whether or not CargoNet makes sense for them as well. We're seeing this spread with other logistics companies, and what will be most interesting, and I just got permission to utilize this, share this information, we just signed up C.H. Robinson. They are one of, if not the biggest freight forwarder or logistics company, as they prefer to be called, in the United States and possibly the world. And they are very much aware of what is being done, what the capabilities are that they can do to try to influence the trucking companies to basically sign up as CargoNet members, because they clearly recognize what the value of that can be to them. Go ahead, Beth. With respect to the insurance space, which I have primary responsibility, there are three indicators, three key factors that we see in almost every type of recovery. And one is that if we can move CargoNet up in the theft timeline, that has huge benefits if it's close enough to when the theft occurs. The other is to promote membership in the supply chain with the manufacturers, with the logistics companies, with the trucking companies, and also with retail. And again, just to give you a perspective, the first retailer that we signed up was Home Depot, and we also have under contract TJ Maxx as well. And whenever we do sign up, whether it's a new insurance company, a new trucking company, any new member, we ask the question whether or not they have data that they would like to share, and that's entirely up to them. The other thing I would also point out is that the data comes to CargoNet. It is not redistributed or rebroadcast within the ISO organization in any way, shape, or form. And that honestly goes back to some of the guidelines that we have to operate under with respect to the security issues that law enforcement is concerned about. And I'll just digress for a minute. Our system allows a member to see any information on an aggregated basis that they choose. There are canned reports on our website. If there is a special need, you can send that report, outline, describe exactly what you want, and we'll set it up to run on a quarterly basis and provide that manually. And obviously, if we get enough requests for something similar, then it will eventually become a canned report. An insurance company can also look at the detail of any claim that they have submitted into the CargoNet system. with one exception, and that is that as you drill down, eventually you'll hit a firewall, and below that point, only law enforcement can utilize that space. And that's the space where they put in information such as Garry Rivell or Keith Lewis are people of interest in this claim. And that comes back to the analytic capability that we'll do, and I'll describe it in more detail in a minute, for law enforcement. But again, that's one of the values that law enforcement sees in the CargoNet system, so that if you have situations that cross legal jurisdictions, they can go into CargoNet, say a New Jersey state police officer can take a look at in the system and find out who the original investigating officer was at the place of theft in Pennsylvania and communicate directly with them without going through a bunch of other hoops to find out who that person is. One of the other things, and I'll defer that. Go ahead, Beth, if you would. So we've got, insurance CargoNet being brought into the situation as early as possible. You've got the membership driven out as deep as possible that we can, and then also the law enforcement strategic alliances. And again, we'll get into each of those in a minute. With insurance companies, we see two viable ways to move CargoNet up in the timeline. First is the inclusion of CargoNet in your first notice of loss procedure, so that particularly after hours, if it's going to a call center, what would typically, not everybody, but what would typically happen is that they take the information, they then will email that information to a claims watch commander, who will then make that decision as to what their protocol calls for actions on their part and begin them as needed, or if there's no liability, no fatalities, that type of thing, the decision on Friday night at 11 o'clock may just be to let that file go to the claim adjuster to set up a file on Monday morning or Monday afternoon or Tuesday. And that's valuable time that we lose. But if they add one additional email, they can, when they send that to the watch commander, that will go to everybody in our command center. And whoever has after-hour duties will immediately jump on that, and we will spring into action. Our purpose is to get actionable information that we can release to law enforcement. And if we don't have that in the initial report, we will reach out to the driver, to the dispatcher, or to the owner to try to secure that information as quickly as possible and get that out to law enforcement. And to try to mitigate the possibility of confusion as to who CargoNet is, we've set up a protocol that identifies who we are, what we do, working with insurance companies. Then we go into the request for the information we need to get the alert out. And then at the end and at the beginning, we actually ask if you have not reported this to your insurance company, you need to do so. And please keep in mind that they're going to ask a lot of questions that may be the same or similar to what we've asked, but you need to work and cooperate with them to try to mitigate any confusion. Go ahead, Beth, if you would. The advantage of the first notice of loss, however, only gets us up in the timeline as to when the insurance company finds out about it. And we track this in the system, and we have companies who have now gone to this first notice of loss and have cut their average time, from 30 days or more down to 2 or 3 days, but that's still a lot of time as it relates to trying to retrieve cargo as soon as possible. So the other thing that we recommend is the use of a deductible waiver. The insurance company determines what that amount is, how to apply it, but our recommendation is to link it to the behavior of prompt reporting. And so we've got one, what I call not only hitting the target, but absolutely hit the bullseye, that basically says if you contact law enforcement and CargoNet within 1 hour of your discovery, then you're eligible for this deductible waiver. And please keep in mind that most of the time you hear this old adage that I need a copy of the police report. CargoNet does not. Ideally, we would get the police report number, but it's also not uncommon for the dispatcher, when the call is placed, to tell you, we can't get anyone out there for an hour or more. If that's the case, we recommend you hang the phone up, call CargoNet, tell us who you talked to, and our command center, made up of law enforcement, retired, will call that law enforcement agency, and a lot of times we find out that it was the wrong one, and they'll, in turn, will put us in touch with the correct law enforcement agency for the jurisdiction where this thing occurred. But all we need is acknowledgement that the theft has been reported to law enforcement, and then we continue our action to get this alert out as quickly as possible. One of the other things that insurance companies are now also doing is recognizing that they're not as close to the policyholder as perhaps the insurance broker is, but they've included a policy insert to go along with the amendment identifying the deductible waiver, what it is, and everything. And by the way, before I move on to the next thing, so far we've seen two options, and I think we're going to see a third. One is that you don't have to be a member of CargoNet. You just have to report it to law enforcement and to CargoNet within a specified period. Another one says you have to be a CargoNet member and you have to report it within an hour. There's actually a third option, which I think is probably the preferred way to go, because I think we'd rather have the behavior of prompt reporting than whether they're a member at that point in time, and that is you have one level of deductible waiver for a CargoNet member, say $5,000, and if you're not a CargoNet member, it's $2,500. But both are contingent upon the prompt reporting within an hour of discovery. Going back to the policy insert, we offer preferred pricing to any trucking company for all services if the insurance company they're with is a CargoNet member. And then also with the policy insert, by the way, it promotes the idea of ABC Insurance Company supports the supply chain industry, supports trucking. And we partnered with CargoNet, and here are some of the key reasons why we think you should, and there's contact information on getting specifics, whether it be a presentation or how much the cost would be. We are not expecting an insurance company or an insurance broker, for that matter, to actually sell CargoNet. We'd rather do that ourselves. So if you could, Beth, move on. And then I mentioned insurance brokers. We fully recognize, I come from the insurance background, and I fully recognize that the insurance broker actually has a closer relationship to their client than does an insurance company. So we have a similar program with insurance brokers. And by the way, one of the things that we're also doing with insurance companies is we're actually doing webinars for underwriting so that they have a functional understanding of what CargoNet does, so that they can be talking up with the brokers and agents that they're dealing with. At the same time, we'll make the same offer to the insurance brokers, to their clients and prospects, and if it's a wholesale brokerage operation, we'll do it for their key retail brokers that are placing business through them. But we issue a press release. We do joint web links so that they're authorized to use the CargoNet logo on things that they want to print. And we'll also support any marketing efforts for both an insurance company or an insurance broker, so that if they exhibit, for example, at a trucking conference and they would like somebody, a representative from CargoNet, we'll come at our own cost. We'll bring our little pop-up and be there to answer questions about CargoNet. The only direct expense associated with this for a broker is that we just ask that the fee for the exhibitor fee be paid by the broker. And like the insurance companies, preferred pricing is offered to their clients as well. Go ahead, Beth. This is the alert capabilities that we have with law enforcement, and I'm really going to focus, you'll see CargoNet in the center. And if you go from CargoNet, you will see at about 4 o'clock a thing called NLETS, at about 5 o'clock critical reach, MCIEF a little after 6, and over around 8 o'clock is RIS. And I'll just comment very quickly because these are the national alert capabilities that we have. And NLETS is the National Law Enforcement Transcommunication System. we can utilize that. That'll go to a state command center and then get pushed out. Critical reach is a little more effective, but it's also more regionalized. But what it does is it creates a geo bubble. So we identify where the theft took place, what time it took place, and then they will cast a bubble with a radius of 250, 300 miles from that point. And any law enforcement agency that's utilizing critical reach would receive that information. You have many more command centers, and at the same time, they have smartphone applications. And if you've ever been in a coffee shop, you usually see 2 or 3 smartphones attached to the belts of most law enforcement. So they're getting this information in that manner. Jumping over to RIS is the Regional Information Sharing System. This was set up by the federal government following 9/11. They have 6 fusion centers around the country. They have over 110,000 law enforcement personnel authorized. You have to be law enforcement background to participate in it. And really on the strength of our command center with nothing but law enforcement almost retired, we're permitted to be involved with the RIS. Just as importantly is there are over 9,000 agencies, law enforcement agencies involved with RIS. The other advantage that RIS gave us is that when we went into Canada, the McLaughlin Center and there's one other fusion center that covered the Canadian border. And probably 2/3, 70% of all Canadian law enforcement agencies along the border are involved with the RIS program. So that gave us a lot of credibility when we went into Canada from a law enforcement standpoint, not to mention the success that you're going to see here in a minute. Okay, next please. What you're seeing here is all the individual law enforcement agencies that we have very specific alliances with. The list of national alert capabilities I just went over is good up to a point because they go out, they go to these command centers. We don't honestly know who the information is being pushed to in law enforcement within that state, for example, or any other place. So we have a strategy, and we take a look. This kind of goes back to what Keith was saying about the pre-pass. We take a look at where the hotspots are, and we're trying to build a network of every law enforcement agency within a certain radius of those hotspots. You've probably all heard that the Florida Tomcats, which was deemed to be one of the most prestigious task force, was disbanded in 2012. And CargoNet quickly jumped in, and we created a virtual task force utilizing Miami-Dade, Doral, Hialeah, and Medley, Florida. Those 4 are contiguous police districts that pretty much governed the ground that the Tomcats covered. So that was one way to exhibit the credibility that we have with law enforcement. On the right is RIS. We talked about that already. And I just wanted to, at the bottom of the left-hand column is LAPD. I mentioned earlier that there have been budget cuts across the board at local, state, and federal levels from a law enforcement standpoint, and LAPD was no exception. So what we've done is we've expanded the involvement we have with LAPD, and under a pilot for 1 year, CargoNet Command Center will literally handle all the analytics for LAPD associated with cargo theft and the theft of the conveyances used in the movement of cargo. This allows for the analysts that they have remaining to focus on things that have a higher priority within law enforcement. But the other advantage to us is it gives us actually more data to do, but also demonstrates, again, the capabilities that we do have from an analytics standpoint. If you want to go to the next one, Beth. In part of what we're able to do, we have a program called linked analysis, also known as NetMaps. It is an extremely robust search engine. And where do we get the data? In the upper right, you'll see, again, as I said, whenever we sign up, law enforcement, if they have any records at all, And we don't care if they're in a filing box. And we've done that with the New Jersey State Police Task Force, bringing in 7 or 8 file boxes filled with handwritten reports. We will get that information into the system. If they have any type of electronics, they can upload it. And we even had one law enforcement agency where they had their own system, and they basically uploaded to ours and mothballed theirs because they can utilize ours much more effectively, because we had significant amount of input into the building of this system from law enforcement. It is not an insurance design database, I'll put it that way. It is a law enforcement design database to help with those kinds of analytics and risk assessment. And then supply chain members as well as insurers. Go ahead, Beth. This is very interesting, and again illustrates the strength of the relationships we have. If you'll notice, it's captioned at the top as 2013. These are all the new law enforcement agencies that have signed on with CargoNet since January 1st of this year. And if you notice, the very last one on the right-hand column, there are 12 to 15 more that I just ran out of room and out of time putting this on. Some of the interesting ones that are on here, I forgot to talk about NEF. You'll see it on the right-hand side, the National Identity Exchange Federation. This is a federal government program that allows law enforcement to move from, at the national level, to move from one system to another. So FBI doesn't have to back out of their system. They press a federated button and they're immediately into the CargoNet system. And one of the first benefits of this was the El Paso Information Center. This is the data center for the Customs and Border Patrol. We've already begun sending law enforcement alerts to them, and once the integration is done, they'll be able to press a button and be directly into the CargoNet system. We're told that CargoNet is the only private industry, the private company that's authorized to participate with this program. You'll see in the middle of the right, the Pennsylvania Department of Justice. They've approached us to train 16,000 law enforcement personnel in the state of Pennsylvania utilizing a Train the Trainer program. And the other one right above toward the top on the right column is the New York, New Jersey Waterfront Commission that we signed an agreement with. It covers the ports of both New Jersey as well as New York. And one of the more interesting things is they passed a regulation that any cargo theft occurring on those premises must be reported to CargoNet. And just very interestingly, you will notice third from the top on the left, Burlington Northern, and you will also notice Norfolk Southern. These are railroad police departments that have also joined because they are not immune. Go ahead, Beth. Just want to go over some case studies quickly, and so hopefully we'll have some time to do questions. First notice of loss, law enforcement comes upon a truck in a remote trailer, rather, in a remote area, locks in place. They enter it into MCIEF, the National Crime Information Center. They do the VIN, they do not get a hit. Come back the next day, enter it again, still do not get a hit. They call the Missouri Fusion Center. This is the center that's part of the Regional Information Sharing System. And they were immediately directed to call CargoNet. And approximately 3 hours before that call came in, we got the first notice of loss from the insurance carrier. We then contacted the owner, confirmed the VIN number, and got back to the law enforcement person, and they seized it and saved a loss of about 75,000 auto parts. Go ahead, Beth. This is one where $250,000 of apparel. One of the things, if you notice at the top, I said our database compared to the NCIC. Two things about NCIC, National Crime Information Center. Number one, only serialized information can be put in that. So clothing, other types of commodities that do not have serial numbers are not going to be in the National Crime Information Center. More importantly, because of some of the budget cuts, they don't have the time to enter all the serial numbers associated with a truckload of smartphones. So you're not going to find that in there. We always get that information from bills of lading and other thing and everything. All the serial numbers of that 53-foot load that was stolen will be in our system in due course. In this case, 7 months later, 3 days later, they found the tractor and trailer empty. 7 months later, law enforcement enters a warehouse, unrelated matter, comes across 26 pallets of clothing, and they upload, nothing serialized, they upload pictures. We sent them out. We searched our database, sent them out to 3 possible theft victims. 1 came back identifying that it was probably theirs, and when they started loading them up, they did find a bill of lading confirming that. Go ahead, Beth. This one is most interesting from the standpoint that the $350,000 load of electronics using covert telematics, they detected that the driver had deviated from the planned lane. No response from the driver, and after the second try, the shipper contacted CargoNet, and we began communications with CTIP, the Cargo Theft Interdiction Program Task Force, which is part of California Highway Patrol. In this case, we didn't need to send out the national alert or any other kind because we were brought into this within minutes of when this thing started to go off the rails. So we provided CTIP with the information associated with GPS coordinates. They located the tractor trailer sitting in a remote part of a warehouse parking lot. They became suspicious of the nature of these warehouses, and using the GPS coordinates, they managed to get search warrants. They go in, and once they uploaded information to CargoNet, in addition to recovering the original $350,000 load, we were able to identify 7 other thefts that were in our system, and the commodities were sitting in that warehouse, totaling over $1 million, which, by the way, did not cover everything that they saw in there, but it was a good start. This is still an ongoing investigation, and sure there will be arrests down the road. Go ahead, Beth. This one is another classic where membership, analytics, and law enforcement are all involved. Distribution center was broken into, guard incapacitated. 4 trailer loads of appliances were stolen. Guard frees himself, calls the shipping company, and they immediately called us. We issued an alert, but we were able to do some quick analytics before we called our point of contact, suggesting that they look in a specific area. Just as a background note, this took place at about 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning Los Angeles time. By 8 o'clock, we now have the analytics done, so we're calling our point of contact in LA at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, explaining what went down. So they found all 4 truckloads sitting in a remote area 60 miles away, and exactly where we, well, not exactly, but in the general area we'd identified for them to make sure that they looked among other places. So rather than just seize them at that time, they staked it out. When the bad guys came back, they ended up with 6 arrests as well as recovery of those 4 loads. This all happened, meaning the arrest and everything, more than 48 hours before the insurance company even got wind that they were on the hook for these 4 truckloads of appliances. That company is now a member and a believer in terms of what our capabilities are. Go ahead, Beth. This last one I thought was to secure our credibility with the folks on the line. This was $1 million load of electronics stolen from a truck stop in Texas. We took time over 3 months to upload all the information we needed in the database from the claims department and whatnot. But again, law enforcement is entering a warehouse. And by the way, so I don't forget, whenever you hear someone from CargoNet mention recovery, we are not boots on the ground. We don't do what claims does. We don't do what SIU does. We are not. And there's always going to be at least 1 or more law enforcement agencies actually involved. But in this case, several serial numbers were run against our database, and we ultimately were able to identify 300,000 of that original $1 million. And that, by the way, is one of the things that the bad guys do, is they try to get this stuff into a warehouse, and then they let it sit and let it percolate until the heat's off, and then they put it back out into black market and other secondary sellers. And that's one of the things that we're working on, is a worm capability that will be able to go and search any company, Alibaba, any of them, that have a website to see whether or not any of the commodities are in there. And Beth, if you want to go ahead, I think that was the last slide, and it's up to Rich as moderator. I'll be happy to take some questions.
Looking at the time, Garry, you nailed it. I didn't get any. Can you guys hear me okay? I didn't get any additional comments coming through on the chat side. So in the interest of time, I'm going to thank all the people who participated today. We had strong numbers. Thank you for staying to the end. And
Rich,
I will just note, yep.
Rich, may I just make one statement?
Yes, sir.
One of the things that we see is a lot of change going on with manufacturers asking truckers, are they CargoNet members and so forth. So I would throw this out as a challenge to the insurance folks, whether you're an insurance company person or an insurance broker. One is, how do you differentiate yourself in the sales process? But given the fact that your truckers' greatest concern is the relationship with the shippers, what are you doing to help them level the playing field with their competitors who may have more resources? Back to you, Rich.
Great summary comment. Thank you, Garry. Thank you, Garry, Keith, everybody who attended today. Gary's contact information was there. As in the past, this will be a recorded session for you members to be able to go back out and access again. For people that could not attend, you'll be able to obtain access to the slides. Gary's contact information was there. You shoot a note to Beth and Tommy, and we can follow back up so that you can talk to him if your company or your agency would like to be more specifically involved. So please note, July 11th is going to be the next monthly Truck Stop webinar. One of those topics that we like to debate, that non-trucking liability, the bobtail deadhead coverage. We're going to have a product specialist coming in to speak to us next month. A guest, again, helping to put this webinar on. So thank you all for attending, and we appreciate it. And success to you all